when we read the Gospels or any other part of Scripture, we should be keeping our eye out for the things that seem out of place. Some of them will seem out of place simply because it's at a different time that they were written. But there will be things that will be out of place even for the time that they were written. And our gospel reading ends with one of those moments. We have the miracle of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And at the end of it, it says, and the number of people fed were 5,000 men, besides women and children. Matthew, as an author, doesn't talk much about women and children. Women and children appear to some extent in all the Gospels, but particularly in the Gospel of Luke. Luke writes about women probably more than all the other Gospel writers combined. So when we see something like this, we've got to say, why is that there in Matthew? Because if you look at the Gospels in their totality, they're all rather kind of short. You can read through the entirety of any Gospel in a couple of hours if you sit down and focus on it. Paper, well, they weren't even really into paper. They started off with storytelling, with oral tradition, and then moved to putting it onto papyrus. And it wasn't plentiful. You know, you couldn't go to your local staple store and pick up a ream of paper, or even a box of paper. What's that? 5,000 sheets of paper. And you can carry it home. You can print on both sides 10,000 pages in a box of paper. Papyrus and ink were very expensive. So you only say what it is you really have to say. And here is Matthew saying 5,000 men with women and children besides. Jesus has fed this huge crowd. And in this huge crowd, Jesus has fed everybody. There are no exceptions. Nobody is left out. Everybody has enough to eat. In fact, everybody has enough to eat, and there's leftovers. 12 baskets of leftovers. Another one of these little things that you need to pay attention to. Because 12 is the number of the tribes of Israel. It represents a sense of fullness and completion. And it's easy, just because of the size of the number, to look at it and go, 5,000 people. That's astonishing. But it's 5,000 people, it's 5,000 men, besides women and children. The important thing there is not that big number. And we often get obsessed with big numbers. The important thing here is that it's everybody. Everybody is not only fed, but everybody is satisfied. Everybody eats as much as they want and need. How often do we look at our lives in that sense? How often do we look at the world around us in that sense? A desire to make sure that everyone has what they need. That everyone is looked after. That everyone is welcome. That when we set a place at the table, we set places for everyone. In feeding the 5,000, Jesus is not simply performing some great physical miracle, although that does happen in that process. We can look at that and remind ourselves of the generosity of God, of the abundance of God. But Jesus feeds everyone. Everyone comes to the table, and everyone who comes to the table does not go away hungry. Jesus always promises and foreshadows a life of fullness. But it's a life of fullness that's meant to be shared with each other and is given for each other. It's not meant to be hoarded away. It's not meant to be kept to ourselves. When the disciples came and said, well, we've got 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus could have said, 12, me, 13, yeah, I think we can make good for ourselves and we'll just send everybody else away. He didn't say to the disciples, really? That's the best you could do? Couldn't you try a little bit harder? No, he says, have the people stay. We'll find a way. And then he gave. He gave generously. And everyone was satisfied. No one went away hungry. Are we willing to believe and give in such a way that no one goes away hungry? That is a question to ask ourselves.